Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. Paris Schutz has the evening off. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment. But first, some of today's top stories. There's a possible deal on a long-stalled plan that would give civilians oversight of Chicago's police department. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot's office says there's significant progress on negotiations, and community groups pushing for civilian control of the CPD report a compromise offered by Lightfoot is close to what they'd accept. If a committee vote passes Tuesday evening, the city council could act as soon as Wednesday. More details on our website. The director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is sounding the alarm for those who haven't yet received the COVID vaccine.
This is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated. We are seeing outbreaks of cases in parts of the country that have low vaccination coverage because unvaccinated people are at risk, and communities that are fully vaccinated are generally faring well.
She's pleading with adults who haven't gotten the COVID vaccine to do so, if not for themselves, for children who aren't yet eligible. In Illinois, COVID is nowhere near winter's peak levels, but cases are trending upward. This past week, the state saw more than 4,400 new cases, doubling the caseload over the first week of July. Meanwhile, the rate of vaccinations hit a lull. 73% of Illinois adults have received at least one dose. That's only an increase of 1 percentage point from last week. Chicago will make home visits to vaccinate people. You'll also get a $50 Grubhub gift card. And any Illinoisan who has been vaccinated is eligible for a cash prize. The state's holding lotteries through next month. A $1 trillion-plus infrastructure package will pass Congress, says U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, even if the plan has to take a detour or two first. Buttigieg gave his vote of confidence after touring the CTA's 95th Street Dan Ryan Red Line station. He also toured the CSX Bedford Park Intermodal Yard.
That's going to create millions of good-paying American jobs, union jobs, I might add, and that represents the largest investment in public transit in the history of the United States. The largest investment, we're proud of that. The largest investment in passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak. The most we've done on roads and bridges in this city of extraordinary and memorable roads and bridges since the Eisenhower administration.
CTA President Dorval Carter says federal funding is the only way Chicago can truly modernize its transit system. Projects could include expanding the Red Line further south and making all transit stops accessible for those with disabilities. You can read more about that on our website, too. But first, let's talk about it with tonight's Week in Review guests. They are Lynn Sweet of the Chicago Sun-Times, Marissa Parra of CBS 2 Chicago, Mary Ann Ahern of NBC5 Chicago, and Tonya Francisco of WGN TV News. Thanks so much, ladies. Now let's just get right to it. Now, Mayor Pete lived for a time in Chicago, and presumably he took the Red Line now and then when he was here. He says he's confident that an infrastructure plan will pass. Lynn Sweet, are you?
No, I'm not. And actually, so everyone knows, he lived in Chicago twice. He was an intern for Channel 2 in Chicago for Renee Ferguson.
Channel 5, Lynn. Hold on.
Let's do that over. Pardon me. He was an intern for Renee Ferguson. I'm so 555. And then management consultant. He lived near North. This deal is nowhere near done. The optimism of the Biden administration is quite understood. The devil is in the details. Negotiations are ongoing. And most important, this is not a standalone infrastructure bill that does have some bipartisan support. It is linked politically with a giant bill stuffed with every Democratic priority that will, under the rules of the Senate, be able to be passed, but only with using a loophole that will let it be passed with only Democratic votes. So a long bit of negotiation still ahead.
And some of that criticism coming from Republicans in Illinois who characterize some of this spending as wasteful. Mary Ann, how is one to judge what is protein versus pork?
Absolutely, Amanda. And I did think it was interesting, that the transportation secretary is going to come where he's going to get all the love. He already has the Democratic support. Why not reach out? Perhaps the Chicago visit, maybe go to Rockford or go to Springfield, go to some of the areas where you're still trying to convince people that this is a good idea. We in Illinois have already passed a $45 billion rebuild Illinois plan. So there are some who are saying, wait a second, is this really what we need right now? It sounds like a lot of money, and it is.
Marissa, to that end, you are often on the road, of course, doing your job, reporting across Chicagoland. Do we need more money pumped into infrastructure, or is that Rebuild Illinois plan, the Illinois paid for one, doing the job?
I think everyone can agree that there's always room for improvement, that I think no matter where you go, what neighborhoods you go to, everyone can see that. And I think, though, that especially when you go to underserved communities in the South Side in particular, which probably had some part in why the 95th Street station was chosen, that becomes even more evident. Just look at all of, the potholes and the crumbling infrastructure that we report on sometimes weekly, if not more. Yeah, I think that's a pretty resounding yes.
Now, Tonya, I want to go to you to get a little bit more on this in terms of the plans here, because this isn't, of course, just we have Secretary Buttigieg right now, but further we had the governor and the Chicago police chief in Washington earlier this week, and then also a suburban president from President Joe Biden himself just last week in Lauren Underwood's congressional district. What is up with the White House Illinois connection lately? Is this politics, just a coincidence in timing?
Oh, never. There's nothing coincidental about anything political. But I think Marianne is right. You come to the place where you get the most love. I think if you preach a message loud enough, long enough, you hope that it will catch on and everyone will start to believe it as well. Chicagoans, Illinoisans have a long list, a long wish list that's been going back for years, if not decades, that they want to actually build upon, and there's not enough state money for it. So if they can get federal help to get it, of course, why not go to the president? Why not go to the transportation secretary? They can provide the funds to make sure that the red line can be extended into the south suburbs, that you can have a super line that comes from O'Hare to downtown. Many of those projects that have been long spoken of cannot be paid for just by Illinois taxpayers. You need federal subsidies to get those done. Also, as you pointed out, when you're riding on these roads, many of them have potholes, not to mention the graffiti, but that's not part of the infrastructure. Marianne, I know you have a thought about that as well. You've tweeted about it a couple of times. But, so it's one of those situations where if the love is going to come, why not accept it? You get your local senators. You got Dick Durbin. You got Tammy Duckworth. Now you have Lauren Underwood. You got Pete Buttigieg, who's here from, having spent some time in the Chicago area, but native to South Bend. If you can get the love, why not take it? I wouldn't turn it down either if I were them.
Although perhaps not helpful in twisting any of the arms of Republicans who are hesitant to get on board. Lynn Sweet, let's go to you to talk a little bit more about that love, because Governor J.B. Pritzker got some of it in Washington, D.C. when he was part of an infrastructure meeting at the White House, but he also had a private audience and tour with President Biden. And as we often wish in politics, to have been a fly on the wall there. What did he speak with Biden about? And is there any proof that that visit is going to pay off for Illinois?
See, let me just pull back the microscope a little bit, pull it up. So, please. Yes, it will pay off because of relationships. He had one with Biden, and it's just stronger. Out of the 8 mayors and governors there, JB's the one that was best known. Remember, his sister was the Commerce Secretary in the Obama-Biden administration. That's one. 2, we're just in the stage of railing, and we don't know where this is going. The big difference, by the way, between the Illinois capital plan and what's proposed, the Illinois plan that J.B. Pritzker passed in 2019, basically is just to maintain what we have. If this federal plan ever happened, it would really be for new things like that extension of the red line. And on your point, it's interesting who wasn't there either in 95th and Dan Ryan or in Bedford Park today, and it was Lauren Underwood, the most endangered Democrat in the Illinois Democratic delegation. That is because her best political bet is just to do her thing and be independent of all these Democrats. If it was truly a bipartisan group, it would have been different. Please note, all 5 Illinois Republicans in the delegation have not been supportive of this infrastructure plan. When I talked to J.B. Pritzker at the White House and asked him about it, he kind of said, well, they should be supportive because there's all kinds of roads and bridges in all their districts. So I do not predict that any of them will vote for this plan, but it would be to their benefit if it was ever passed.
We're thankful to you, Lynn, for keeping an eye on things from Chicago while you're in our nation's capital there. Staying on the federal elections and what's going on federally. Now, fundraising totals were great during the era for Democrats, that is, when Speaker Michael Madigan was head of the Democratic Party of Illinois. But now that he isn't, fundraising looking much weaker. And the new chair of the DPI, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, is in a further weakened position after a new ruling that says she can only stick to federal fundraising, no fundraising for any state races. Instead, there will be an independent committee, totally separate from her, that will be doing that. Now, Marianne, Democrats knew that this sort of was a restriction, was a possibility when they chose Kelly for the job. So why did they, and do you buy that she says that this makes the party more inclusive versus just putting her in a ceremonial role?
Well, I do think at the time that this all happened during the winter, it was a bit of a surprise that Madigan decided to step down. Now, at first from his post as the Speaker of the House, and then as the chairman of the party. And so there was some wrangling behind the scenes going on. And some, including J.B. Pritzker, wanted Alderman Michelle Harris. Others who supported Robin Kelly won. And I think they felt as if, wait a second, we're not sure if we want, even though the governor has got plenty of influence and plenty of money to give to various candidates, did they want him to have all of that? So they ended up going Kelly, and I guess you would maybe say some of the more progressives went with her. But 83% of the money in the past that Madigan raised went to local candidates. It also bought him a lot of, love and influence. We're talking a lot about love tonight, I guess, with all the gals on the show. I can't help it, but it is going to be. We're going to have to watch and see what happens. The state house and the state senate, they looked to Madigan to help them out. Without that money, it might be a new day for the General Assembly of who is going to be able to raise the kind of funds they need to get elected.
Can I jump in for a
moment?
Of course,
please do.
Okay, so we really have. Let me give Kelly the benefit of the doubt for a moment, because Madigan raised the money mainly from the Democratic allied interests who are not going to walk away. Do you think getting a photo op like Madigan was why people gave the money? Because he was just so cool to be in the room with him? No. Some of this money is going to come in anyway, no matter you don't need Robin Kelly to personally make the call in the way that maybe Madigan did, and whoever is in charge of what they will call the fundraising committee, which also will have some power to hire and fire, that money is, the Democratic money is going to be in play. And there are other people of influence who could step in and do that role. It is taking a risk. But let me tell you, with all due respect to the woman who Representative Kelly ran against, Alderman Michelle Harris, there is no track record that she had in any way of doing any major fundraising. So let's get real here. You had 2 candidates, each with pluses and minuses. There is a workaround now for Kelly that could work. We'll see. By the way, Speaker Chris Welch is coming to Washington at the end of the month for his fundraising here.
So perhaps new avenues for fundraising. We've got a bunch of smart reporters here. So just before we move on, does anybody know who will be on this committee? Speaker Welch has said he won't be, but that will be a new avenue for fundraising power. Anybody?
Right. No, haven't heard.
Same here. All right. Let's move on then to a federal decision that just was handed down by a federal judge out of Texas this afternoon. And that says that undocumented immigrants who come to the U.S. as children who are not already Dreamers can no longer apply for that DACA status. Marissa, what impact could this have, both politically and in Chicago neighborhoods?
Right. I've spoken a lot with Dreamers actually here in Chicago, and one, Elisa Arguelles, she has been pretty prevalent within the community of both folks who have gained their citizenship after coming from other countries and within the community of undocumented immigrants themselves here in Chicago. And so she has been sort of my guide into the devastation that the community would feel if people weren't able to go through the same path that she had, right? She basically, I think she had a very compelling story. Her family would make tamales, and through making tamales, she paid her way to get her education, the one that she has today. So I think that there's a very common trope that you'll hear sometimes that people, Dreamers even, are perhaps just trying to take the easy way out. And so I think that she's been very loud and outspoken in her mission to disprove that as someone who spent so many sleepless nights, not only helping her family, not only trying to pay for her own education, but also trying to help other undocumented immigrants who don't speak the language, which does prove to be a massive barrier when it comes to going through the citizenship process. And the idea of being a Dreamer and her being able to be the shining light, yeah, this is probably pretty devastating to so many people that she's currently trying to help.
Devastating, and we'll be watching to see whether this is an impetus for any congressional action and Biden following through on some promises there. Let's move to, unfortunately, a topic we often hit on this program, and that is crime in Chicago. Now, Mayor Lightfoot has been promising creative solutions to this and now debuting a $1 million fund that will be awarded to tips that lead to the seizure of illegal guns. Tanya, is this a creative solution? Will it make a difference?
I'm hard-pressed to say that it will be making a difference. You already have gun turn-ins where you get money when you turn in a gun. You have police seizing thousands, hundreds, thousands of guns every weekend. I can't even keep up with the total as it is to date, but I know at some point it was up to $6,000 guns this year. So the guns are being taken off the streets, the ones that are willingly coming off the streets. By offering money, I don't see how many more guns come off the streets as a result. I think the issue here about getting creative is going back to what works. Go back to that period in the city where you had less gun violence and find out what was taking place at the time. As a kid who grew up in the city on the west side of Chicago, I know what kept me out of trouble, which was daycare, which was after-school programs, things that kept my mind occupied, my friends occupied, so that we couldn't get into quote-unquote devilment. So I think that's what a lot is. You stop the tide of problems of going into gun violence and going into gangs if you can start with that section. The next section of people who are already involved, you need to give them an alternative to what is prompting them to be involved in gun violence. I was talking to Father Flager after the shooting over on 79th and Justine just the other day, and he said, gun violence, guns are the way we talk to each other now. Instead of actually having an argument or a discussion or a conversation, we pull out a gun, and that's how the conversation takes place. It's time to start helping to reach the hearts and minds of the people who are involved in gun violence, giving them other opportunities, and then you stem the tide. But to just give someone some money from turning in a gun, we've already tried that. That's what gun turn is, gun buybacks do. Has that stopped the gun violence? I haven't seen that.
This is something that Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown presumably got brought up when he went to the White House earlier this week to ask for more help federally in combating violence in Chicago. When he came back, though, he continued to blame judges for that violence. Let's take a look.
And I know I'm being repetitive. Keeping violent offenders in jail longer will reduce violent crime in Chicago.
So I want to go to you, Marissa. Anything that you want to add on that? We've been talking about it, and yet on top of that violence, really, you covered one of these mass shootings, 2, where 5 individuals were shot on Wednesday. I believe you covered the one in Auburn Gresham. So a lot of people believe that there's the courts angle, there's the gangs. What is going on here? Because this wasn't a gang-related event, right?
Correct. I mean, I think it's a hodgepodge of a lot of factors here. And I think Tanya brought up a really good point. When I speak to violence interrupters, which, by the way, that mass shooting was, as we know, right across the street from an anti-violence organization. And something that I hear across the board is, and this is from violence interrupters and people who specialize in these sorts of things, is, they say we work so hard to tell people to put the guns down. And then the hardest part is, well, then what do I do instead? How do I tell people to put the guns down when I am not able to offer them hope that there's another way of life, that there's another way of living? And so I think that the difficulty here is everyone wants to find one solution or one person to blame or one thing to blame. And it's so much more nuanced than that. And the hard part is, how do you find a solution by capping something right now? We're talking about things like preventative measures that you wouldn't see the benefits of or effects of for 10 years, if not longer, as children get older. But I think prevention, I think that's a huge part that gets missed here. Everyone wants to finger point towards, whether it's Cook County State's Attorney's Office or Superintendent Brown, but it's so much more than that.
It's deeper. People really wanting a solution. And one of those,
and Amanda, if I could just add one more thing, by bringing in the federal troops and the federal manpower, you now transfer these cases from the Cook County court to the federal court, which have a completely different outcome. You don't have as much leniency, I guess you could say. You have harder sentences. You don't get parole. You don't get home electronic monitoring. The sentencing is different. So then you do get those so-called repeat offenders off the ground and then off the streets. And now it looks as though, oh, this is working because now we have federal help. It's a totally different jurisdiction. And anybody who's lived in Chicago any period of time knows it's different when you go to the Dirksen versus when you go to the Layton criminal courthouse. The outcomes are completely different.
So and that is something
here's the issue. Here's the issue with that, though, is how long will they stay? We saw federal strike force last year with President Trump. To have them come during these summer months, of course, and we think that might be as soon as next week. But it is, it's the continuation of that. Certainly that they have an influence and help. But is it just sort of a 2-3 month deal, and then we're back to the same issue once they leave?
Can I just jump in and make two quick points here?
Sure, quickly, yeah.
Any day now to see what enhanced help and what the Biden White House is calling a strike force is coming in. On the point of intervention, on Thursday at the White House, there were just a handful of people, including Eddie Boca. I hope I don't say his name wrong. Eddie
Bocanegra.
Bocanegra was there visit to the White House within just a few weeks. And just so you know, he's a senior director at the Heartland Alliance gun safety program and violence interruption program. And this crime initiative includes this. He was one of a few people at the White House for the second time, briefing the White House on, when he was there the first time, he told me it was on things that work. Chicago is one of 15 cities that are part of this kind of carve-out for intervention policies. So the Biden White House is also putting, we don't know how much, some putting some assets in this to see what they could do.
One of the things that many community activists and organizations say could make a difference is community belief in law enforcement, or doing away with it altogether, some would say. So we are hearing word, Mary Ann, that there is a possible deal on the horizon for community oversight of the CPD. So what are you hearing in terms of what this would mean for taking away the mayor's ability to hire and fire a superintendent? And how weak would that leave any mayor?
Absolutely. He's going to have an elected school board. To lose the authority of oversight of the CPD would be really massive for her. She spoke with Bill Cameron from WLS Radio saying that, of course, she does not want that to happen. There will be more meetings early next week. They did discuss it today at City Hall at a committee. I, of course, was not there because I was with Buttigieg, but I did see some of the give and take on it. This is something that reformers and former, when she wasn't not running yet, but when she was part of the reform, Lightfoot said, yes, I want this. Now that she's the mayor, she says, oh, wait a second. I want to be able to pick who will be in charge. That would be huge if she lost that opportunity.
That would certainly be big. And while we're on this note, unfortunately, we only have about 30 seconds left. But Marissa, I wanted to see if you can add anything. Has the CPD done enough when it comes to mental health? A third police officer committed suicide this week.
Hard to say because it depends on who you ask. I've spoken with officers who would say a hard no on that. They say that they're stretched thin. I think it's something a lot of us can relate to, sometimes feeling understaffed, but with them, they're also putting their lives on the line.
And I'm so sorry, Marissa, I'm going to have to end you there because we are out of time. Thank you so very much for all of the vibrant discussion that you offered. Lynn Sweet, Marissa Parra, Marianne Ahern, and Tonya Francisco. And that is our show for this Friday night. Be sure to join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. Then 6 p.m. Sunday for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Then we're back at 7 o'clock next week. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices.